during the committee stages.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable David Parker.
Look, we all know that if the National Party had their way, they would be abolishing the Supreme Court and taking us back to the Privy Council. But the only problem with that is that actually we'd need the permission of the British government to do that, and they wouldn't have us. The reason they're doing this is they don't need anyone's permission. Mr Speaker, it's a nonsense that we're going back to this old-fashioned term of Queen's Counsel rather than Senior Counsel. It is embarrassing, isn't it? You know, have we got no more important political agenda in this country than changing the name of senior lawyers back to Queen's Counsel? Mr Speaker, worse than the name change is the change in principle being made here to restrict those who can be senior counsel now to be called Queen's Counsel to being those of the separate bar. You can't be appointed Queen's Counsel under this legislation unless you are a barrister sole. What does that do in the provinces? It effectively means that no one in the provinces, or very few people in the provinces, can ever be senior counsel, because those smaller towns cannot support people who, or generally can't support people in an adequate living who are at the separate bar alone. And generally the best lawyers in provincial centres, and this is a generalisation, but it's true of a lot of smaller centres, the best lawyers are actually the lawyers that are in firms. The barristers sole are more often in the smaller centres confined to the criminal legal aid roster and in some occasions doing family court work, but predominantly doing minor criminal work on the legal aid roster. They are not the top lawyers in the regions. The lawyers, not always the top lawyers in the region, I would say, because I don't want to insult some of them. There's some very good barristers in smaller towns, but the general rule is that the top lawyers would be in firms of barristers and solicitors, and they are both. And they will never be able to be, under this legislation, appointed senior counsel, despite the fact that they might be the best practising barrister in the whole of the province. What a nonsense that under this legislation those people will never be eligible to be considered to be senior counsel. It's not just a problem in the smaller centres. You know, there's not much doubt that one of the most capable barristers in this country is Jack Hodder at Chapman Tripp, former editor of Capital Letter, a leading legal publication that was produced by Jack Hodder for many years. He wrote the editorials as well as put it together, and he is a leading counsel still in many cases in New Zealand's highest courts. Now, under this legislation, because he is in a firm of solicitors and operates as both a barrister and solicitor, he can never be appointed senior counsel. That's true of a number of other barristers and solicitors. In my own city of Dunedin, the most senior barristers and solicitors were every bit as competent as the people who were appointed Queen's Counsel. It's a nonsense that the list of people is limited to only being from the bar alone. What's the idea behind this? They say that, oh, they're the only people who can be truly independent. Well, if that were the case, we wouldn't allow people who are barristers and solicitors and legal firms to be appearing in courts in the first place, because somehow they would be bringing an inferior level of independence or service to the courts. It's just not true. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a retrograde step. In market analysis, of course, if you limit the market of any good or service, you'll actually drive up the price. So, because you're going to decrease the quality. So, assuming here that you've got the same number of Queen's Counsel as would have been senior counsel under the old system, you're actually going to jack up the price for Queen's Counsel. Queen's Counsel are very, very expensive to employ in New Zealand, in part because we have too few of them. We drive up the cost of Queen's Counsel services by not appointing enough of them. And this bill will further entrench that extra revenue that goes to Queen's Counsel to the detriment of their clients. Not as it won't be improving the quality of justice. It'll actually again be limiting the pool of Queen's Counsel, and I don't think that's appropriate. Mr. Speaker, the other point that Charles Chauvel has already made well is that the appointment process is now going to become less transparent. What's wrong with transparency? What's wrong with transparency? You know, there's been some bad things have happened in this country under this government in terms of the standards which we have in various institutions, and I'm going to list them because this is part of a long list of things that are where standards are declining in New Zealand. We had this government appoint the chairperson of John Key's electorate to the Broadcasting Commission. It's also known as New Zealand On Air. A political appointee to that role is inappropriate. Those people should be apolitical, and he showed his politics when during the election he tried to influence the timing of a program on child poverty. That was a black mark for this government along the lines of the lack of transparency around Queen's Counsel. A lot worse than this, in fact. And then we had the government or the National Party using the police against the media during the election, the T-tapes. And after the election, when it was going to go to trial, the Prime Minister found it convenient to drop the prosecution. Said he didn't want that to proceed and said that Mr Ambrose had been deemed guilty by the police. Terrible thing to do. He was never tried by a court and he had defences, and the reason that was dropped was because it would have been embarrassing for Mr Banks and Mr Key to turn up in court and try to allege that that was illegal. What's that? Well, speak to the bill. Actually, I'm speaking to the number of examples, Mr Bennett, that your government oversees things that are inappropriate. Then we've got the lack of What's that? Then we've got the lack of transparency around other processes like giving contracts for the extra pokey machines in Auckland. I would know about that, would I? Actually, I'm not a gambler, Mr Bennett, so I wouldn't know about that. What I do know is that it's inappropriate to effectively sell regulatory favours to get a convention centre built, and if you're going to do that, you should put it out to tender so that other people can actually have a crack and say, well, give us a regulatory or tax holiday and we'll build you a convention centre without the pokies. They are still carrying on with that, Mr Horomia. And now we've got this additional lack of transparency. What else have we seen recently? We've seen the government, in respect of the SOE legislation, put mixed ownership model companies beyond the purview of the Official Information Act. Criticised by the Ombudsman as being inappropriate. There were already... No, they don't believe in transparency. Then we had this government vote down a private members bill which would have, in respect of council-owned companies that are port companies, would have brought them into the Official Information Act as well. Again, they don't like transparency. They voted against that, notwithstanding the fact that they could have, in any case where there was commercial sensitivity or other things to be kept confidential, there are already defences under the Official Information Act that stop that information being made public. So, again, we have a process here which is going to become less transparent. Why is that? Well, it probably suits the club of existing people who are more likely to be appointed senior counsel because they come through a certain route, and that's not to demean their capability. Our Queen's Counsel are very capable in New Zealand, but it really should be more transparent so that justice can be seen to be done rather than be a club of insiders who can always get the nod. And I don't think there was any reason to move away from the transparent process that the prior Labor government set up. So in terms of some of the changes to conveyancing, we agree on this side that they're appropriate. We're not speaking against those, but these are fundamental problems with this bill, and for that reason the Labor Party is opposing this.
Mr Speaker.
I call Stephen Browning.
Mr Speaker.